Hi there! During the recent broadcast it was announced that the upcoming Gunsmoke battle will feature the new boss Chaos Resentment. As usual, I will go over the abilities and core mechanics of this boss and conclude by briefly discussing important considerations for team building. Without further ado, let's get to it. First off, Chaos has 105 stability, 40 more than previous Gunsmoke bosses, and a total of roughly 5.4 million HP, about 1.8 million or 50% more than the Berserker. As usual, the boss benefits from 80% damage reduction while not in stability break, and you want to group up the team close by to engage with its mechanics. Then, Chaos has a passive effect, granting it a 10% elemental or physical damage resistance whenever it receives 5 instances of the respective damage type. This buff is stackable and can be cleansed. Here, Lena's fix key takes care of the buff, which converts it into a stacking 3% vulnerability debuff. This debuff is capped at 10 stacks for a total of 30% vulnerability. For teams with a high hit count, this will be quickly maxed, so long as you have sufficient sources of buff removal in your lineup. Characters like QJ or the Electric Core members are particularly suited for the task, since they dispel outside of their turns. For instance, as Ender's second turret attacks, another resistance stack appears, but this time after connectivity procced. Then, Leva's support action is triggered by negative charge. With her fix key, she removes buffs before damage is dealt, just like QJ, thereby yielding the second stack of vulnerability. If you only have active buff removal in your lineup, you may want to keep track of the hit count and adjust your turn order accordingly. On the boss's first turn, it will activate another one-time only passive effect that grants it a shield equal to 10% of its max HP, meaning a bit over 500k HP. While this shield is active, it gains a defensive buff, reducing its stability damage taken by 2 and increasing its defense by 50%. This buff cannot be dispelled and will only be removed once the shield is destroyed. The reduced stability damage won't be an issue if you manage to break the boss within the first round. But enough with the passive abilities, let's look at its active skills. Chaos will use its S1 every round. This attack targets the nearest and farthest ally and applies the quote-unquote desire to fight state. This debuff is stackable, making the character receive 10% more damage, but also granting 10% bonus attack. Due to the stacking attack bonus, you want to make sure that you position your best damage dealers to receive this attack every round, unless you're struggling to sustain the team. The buff's duration is round based, so characters with extra actions have no issue maintaining the stacks. Note that Chaos retaliates against active attacks from targets with desire to fight. Here, Leva's S2 and her follow-up attack are each countered by the boss, which may start to hurt when the vulnerability reaches higher numbers. As for the team's formation, Lainey is directly in front of the boss and Leva is 5 tiles away. The distance is always calculated from the center of the boss's position. What's interesting is that you can position the team in a way that the boss will choose the same target twice. Here, every unit is exactly 4 tiles away from the boss. Now, Leva is both the nearest and farthest target, receiving 2 stacks of the buff every turn. If you are running 1v6 hypercarry on the team, this formation is preferable. Next, the boss uses its S2 every other round, marking the highest HP ally with warning tiles in a 2-tile range around the target. We will look at the effect next round, when the skill activates. Finally, the boss concludes with its S4. This is a global AoE attack that deals fixed damage for 10% of a target's max HP and applies the debuff Whisper, which increases damage taken by 10%. This debuff is quite unique in that it gets cleansed when HP is restored to full HP or if HP is more than 100%, which then grants a stacking 15% defense penetration buff. The unofficial translation of this buff is a bit clunky here, but as you can see the debuff is instantly replaced with the buff because everyone on the team is above 100% HP. Keep in mind that platoon level stat bonuses apply multiplicatively to your character's pre-battle stats, which is to say that a 25% HP bonus shows up as 125% HP for a character. The only character that directly modifies the team's max HP is Springfield via her buff Deep-Rooted Bonds. While this buff is stackable in theory, the boss uses this ability only every other round and the debuff conversion occurs for each character individually. With the 2-turn duration, it will expire just before a new stack gets applied. Again, this buff's duration is round based, so if activated during the boss's first turn, it will fall off at the start of the boss's third turn, irrespective of extra action mechanics. Then, at the start of round 2 and 5, 3 boxes spawn around the map. You're already familiar with this stage mechanic from the Berserker. Interacting with the box grants a 20% damage bonus for 2 turns, which does not stack. Picking these up can be a bit tricky, since the supplies are quite spread out, and you don't want to mess up your formation for the bosses as one. The best approach is to have your DPS close enough to one of the spawn areas, so that they can interact and return to their starting position within the same turn. That said, receiving stacks of the attack buff takes priority over the 20% damage bonus. Starting on the boss's second turn, the S2, which previously created the warning tiles around the highest HP ally, activates, dealing physical damage to everyone in range and applying a debuff based on the number of targets hit. If 3 or less targets were hit, the debuff will reduce the movement range, and if more than 3 targets were hit, the debuff will increase the damage taken. The effects are somewhat irrelevant, what matters are the benefits of cleansing the debuffs. On the team's turn, Yohi uses her graceful spin extra ability in combination with Kolfner's common key to trigger the first cleanse on Lainey. If 3 or less targets were hit by the AoE, the team will gain a stacking 5% physical defense penetration buff. If more than 3 targets were hit, the team will gain a stacking 5% elemental crit damage buff. Consequently, all lineups except for one will want to have all members group up within the warning tile area. As with the Berserker on Emertia, cleansing one ally grants a stack for everyone. There's no stack limit, so the more bodies you bring, the more stacks you will gain. This highlights an inherent disadvantage for the physical variant, because you can at most receive 3 stacks, while the elemental damage buff scales with the number of characters and summons. The buff's duration is again tied to the round number, lasting for 2 rounds after the initial cleanse. Since the boss's S2 activates on its even-numbered rounds, you will maintain the stacks by cleansing on your team's odd-numbered rounds. That is to say on round 3, 5 and 7. Unlike with Nemertia, global cleansers are great here, because the buff's duration is decoupled from the turn order. Next, as noted before, the boss uses its S1 every turn, selecting the nearest and farthest ally for another stack of the attack bonus and vulnerability debuff. This puts the damage dealers at 2 stacks, or 4 if you make one character take the hits. By the final turn, you can get up to 120% bonus attack for a single DPS, or 60% if split between 2. Then, the boss uses its S3 on every even-numbered round. This attack deals AoE damage to all targets within 5 tiles of the boss. For every 3 targets hit by the attack, the boss receives a stacking 10% defense reduction debuff. Here, the team feels a total of 8 bodies, resulting in 2 stacks of the defense debuff. The stacks remain for 2 turns, so starting from your team's 3rd turn, the defense reduction will be in effect permanently. If this skill doesn't hit any targets, the boss will receive an undispellable 30% defense bonus for 1 turn. While this is irrelevant for manual play, it unfortunately bodes ill for autoplay. Since units see cover, they will inevitably move outside of the boss's 5-tile range. Clearly, the developers want your unwavering dedication, twice a day, every day, for a full week. Before we conclude, Chaos has one more passive similar to the one-time only effect on turn 1. When the boss's HP falls below 50%, it will activate another shield, this time equal to 15% of its max HP, or about 800k HP. While this shield is active, all damage received will be reduced by 30%. Unlike typical damage resistances, which are negated by damage bonuses, this effect is a final damage reduction, meaning your damage is calculated first, after which 30% are subtracted. By the time this passive activates, you'll have a lot more amplification going though, so breaking the shield should take less effort. With that, you've seen all of Chaos's mechanics. Here's the skill order, which alternates regularly between 2 patterns. The S1 is used every round, the S2 takes 2 rounds to activate, and the S4 alternates with the S3. For clarity, I'll translate the skills to their respective effects and remove the final boss turn, which doesn't affect our gameplay. The boss's ability take effect on the following turn for our team, so the turn 2 effects correspond to the turn 1 skills. The boss uses its S1 every round, which targets the nearest and farthest ally for the stacking attack bonus. You need to constantly monitor your formation to ensure that the right characters on your team receive the buff. If you run a single carry lineup, the positioning is very strict, because all allies need to have the same distance to the boss. Next, the S4 applies a debuff that is immediately converted to a 15% defense penetration buff when your team's HP is above 100%. This condition is easily fulfilled and the buff lasts for 2 rounds, making this effect essentially permanent, though you won't be able to stack it any further. The S2 creates warning tiles on the round it is cast, and its effect activates on the following turn. Depending on the number of allies that are hit by the attack, you'll either receive a debuff which converts into a physical defense penetration or elemental crit damage buff. Assuming you want the elemental buff, you will have to position everyone within the warning tile area to receive as many debuffs as you can, 9 at most. The buff stacks last for 2 rounds, so have your cleanses ready on turn 3, 5 and 7. Then, once the boss has used its S3, its defense will effectively be permanently reduced. For every 3 targets it hits within a 5 tile area around itself, it will apply a 10% defense reduction up to a maximum of 30%. So long as you stay within the critical area surrounding the boss, you won't have to actively think about this mechanic. Bringing characters that can summon additional bodies for a total of at least 6 targets is preferable. Finally, 3 boxes spawn around the map on round 2 and 5. Interacting with one of these grants a non-stacking 20% damage bonus for 2 turns. Position your DPS close to one of the areas, so that they can pick up the box and return to their intended position. This is less of an issue when running a dual carry setup, as one of the two will want to keep their distance anyway. All that being said, here's a snapshot of the amplifications on the final turn. The 15% defense penetration is permanent starting from turn 2. The attack bonus increases as the match progresses, reaching 60% attack for dual DPS setups or 120% attack for single DPS setups. The elemental crit damage stacks scale with the number of bodies on the field. Here, with 8 targets and a total of 3 team-wide cleanses, the stacks reach 24 for a total bonus of 120% crit damage. The boss is affected by a permanent defense reduction starting from turn 3, minus 20% with at least 6 targets. Depending on your team's hit count, you should also be able to reach the 10 stacks of vulnerability for 30% increased damage taken somewhere around the 3rd or 4th round. In conclusion, make sure to bring buff dispel and debuff cleanse against this boss. In particular, out of turn dispel from characters of the burn and electric elements will be helpful to quickly convert the resistance stacks as they appear. Lineups with high hit counts are favored to quickly max out the vulnerability stacks, though most teams should have no trouble with this mechanic. Characters with summons like Nikita or Andorus are good choices, as the extra bodies will reduce the boss's defense by an additional 10% and provide bonus crit damage stacks. The bonus is not enough to warrant a crutch like Papasha though. AoE debuff cleansers like Centaurasi and Yohi are good, because the buff durations are round based. And with that we've come to the end of this video. I hope you found this guide helpful and feel better prepared to tackle this season of your favorite game mode. Jokes aside, I think it's high time we get to face a new opponent. The Berserker with its unchanging elemental weaknesses became stale very quickly. Once the new season starts, I'll try to put together guides for manual and autoplay for popular team compositions, though don't expect too many variations as I can only do so much with my limited account roster and no test server to record gameplay in advance. In any case, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.